You ever wake up one morning and find a mansion halfway built on your land? Yeah. That happened to me. Name's Porter O'Connell. I'm a retired firefighter, and after 25 years of busting my back for the city, I bought myself a quiet acre just outside the suburbs. Built a modest ranch-style home with my own hands and planted oaks along the border. Peaceful, private, mine. That was until Brenda Garvey showed up. Brenda's the president of the local HOA, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of woman who treats a clipboard like it's a judge's gavel. I wasn't technically in her HOA. My property line started 20 feet past their neighborhood boundary. But that didn't stop her from knocking on my door with her usual fake smile and nasal voice. "You know, Porter," she said, standing on my porch like she owned it, "it's only fair you join the HOA. We're all part of the same community." "Nope," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "I've got the deed. My property's not part of your subdivision." She laughed like I'd told a joke. "Well, we'll see about that." I should have seen it coming. A few months later, I came home from a fishing trip and nearly drove into a cement truck parked right on the edge of my land. There were surveyor flags everywhere, and a construction crew was already pouring foundation. I flagged down the guy with the clipboard. "This some kind of mistake?" I asked. He looked at his sheet. "This is Phase 3 of the Willow Creek expansion. Says here the land's HOA owned." I stared at him. "This land's mine," he shrugged. "Not what the papers say." Guess who had signed off on the papers? Brenda Garvey. I didn't storm over to her house. I didn't raise hell. Nope. I let her build. For the next 6 months, I watched that thing rise like some kind of Greek temple. Massive columns, imported stone, iron gates. She even installed a koi pond. And every week, she'd wave at me from the construction site like I was her friendly neighbor. "Isn't it beautiful, Porter?" she'd chirp. "You'll have the best view in town." I'd nod, sip my coffee, and say, "Sure is coming along." Meanwhile, I was collecting everything: drones, photos, time-stamped videos, conversations with the workers, even copies of the adjusted plot lines she filed with the county. I knew what she was doing: forging documents, bribing a lazy clerk, and bullying her way into free land. But I had something better: the real deed. Signed, notarized, and filed before her HOA even existed, and I was just waiting for the right moment to drop it. The final marble lion was craned onto the front steps the same day I walked into the county recorder's office with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. The clerk, a young guy named Reggie, started sweating when he saw my name. "I think there's been some confusion," he mumbled, flipping through his computer. "The parcel was transferred." "No," I cut him off. "It wasn't. I've got the original deed, time-stamped filings, topographic surveys, and drone footage showing uninterrupted possession. You're going to want to forward this to your legal department, today." He didn't argue. I left him pale and dialing his supervisor. The very next morning, I filed a civil injunction with the county court and requested a temporary freeze on the property. Thanks to the weight of my documentation, the judge signed off within hours. An official order went out to halt all activity on the site. Brenda didn't take it well. She rolled up in a silver Lexus, parked across my gravel drive, and marched up to my porch in 4-inch heels like she was about to auction my soul. "You're trespassing," she snapped, stabbing a manicured finger toward the mansion. "That structure is part of the Willow Creek expansion and legally approved under municipal zoning." I held up a copy of the injunction. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the court seal, her eyes narrowed, and she tried a different tactic. "You're being difficult for no reason." "We had an understanding." "No," I said, "you had a fantasy, one you forged into county records." Her mouth opened like she might protest, but her lawyer instincts, or more likely, her ego, held it back. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "I'm counting on it," I replied. 3 days later, I filed a formal lawsuit for unlawful encroachment, property theft, zoning fraud, and falsification of public documents. My attorney friend, a retired prosecutor named Ellie Vargas, took the case for free. Said it was the most satisfying paperwork she'd filed in years. The discovery phase turned up gold: emails between Brenda and a county zoning officer named Lyle Kendrick. Bribes disguised as consulting fees. Altered survey maps that conveniently erased the 20-foot buffer separating my land from HOA jurisdiction. Even a memo from the HOA board expressing concern over her aggressive acquisition strategy. But the kicker: a private contractor's invoice submitted directly to Brenda's personal email. The note read, "As discussed, final payment due upon completion of Phase 3. No further permits required since boundary issue has been handled." Ellie forwarded that one straight to the district attorney. Meanwhile, the mansion sat untouched. Contractors stopped showing up. Brenda tried to list it for sale, but the court froze the parcel. No bank would touch it. The koi pond dried up. The iron gates rusted in place. She filed a countersuit. Of course, claimed I was harassing a community leader and intentionally obstructing development. Her lawyer, one of those fast-talking types who probably charged by the syllable, tried to argue my deed was invalid due to a clerical oversight during a county redistricting 5 years prior. Ellie shredded him. She brought in a land surveyor who'd worked with the state for 3 decades. He laid out aerial photos dating back 15 years, each one showing the same tree line, the same fence posts, and the same mailbox with my name on it. Then, she introduced a forensic document analyst who testified that the updated deed Brenda filed had been backdated and digitally manipulated. The courtroom was packed by the second hearing. Local press had picked up the story. Residents of Willow Creek, most of whom had their own horror stories about Brenda, started showing up to watch her squirm. One afternoon, during a recess, a couple from down the street approached me outside the courthouse. "We always thought something was off," the woman said. "She fined us for planting sunflowers," her husband nodded. "Told us they violated visual harmony standards, said she'd call code enforcement. She ever show you those rules in writing?" I asked. They looked at each other. "No," Ellie added them to our witness list. By the time the trial date arrived, the judge had already reviewed enough evidence to make his position clear. "Not only has the plaintiff demonstrated lawful ownership of the parcel in question," he said, "but the defendant appears to have engaged in a deliberate scheme to fabricate property records and defraud both the county and private citizens." He paused, then looked pointedly at Brenda. "This court finds in favor of Mr. O'Connell. The property is to be returned fully and unconditionally to his control. Furthermore, I am referring all related evidence to the district attorney's office for criminal review." Brenda didn't speak. Just stood there, staring down at her patent leather heels like they might open a trapdoor. The courtroom murmured. Someone actually clapped before the bailiff hushed them. Afterward, as I stepped outside, local news crews rushed in. I didn't say much, just held up the original deed and said, "Sometimes all you need is the truth and a little patience." The mansion, now legally mine, was assessed by the court. I was offered 2 options: dismantle it or take ownership. I chose the second, didn't want the thing, really. But I knew what to do with it. Within a month, I had it converted into a shelter for first responders dealing with PTSD. Ellie helped me set up the nonprofit. Donations poured in once the story aired. The koi pond. We turned it into a memorial garden. As for Brenda, the DA hit her with 5 felony charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and filing false instruments. Lyle Kendrick was arrested the same week. The HOA board. They held an emergency vote and removed her from leadership permanently. Funny how quickly power crumbles when you shine a light on it, and the couple with the sunflowers. They've got a whole garden now stretching across the sidewalk. Not a single fine. Turns out, the best way to deal with a bully is to let them build their throne, then pull the floor out from under them. With the deed, the law, and a whole neighborhood finally waking up, that's exactly what I did. The day after the court ruling, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a typed note that read, "This isn't over, you don't belong here." No signature, No clue who sent it, but the message was clear. I didn't report it. Instead, I installed motion-activated floodlights around the property and added 2 more cameras to the perimeter. One facing the road, the other watching the side yard where the old oak leaned heavy over the fence line. I wasn't afraid. I just didn't trust desperate people to stay quiet when the walls started closing in. Ellie called that afternoon. "Porter," she said, "you might want to sit down." "I'm standing in the garden," I replied. "You've got about 2 minutes before I burn my lunch. There's a federal audit opening on Willow Creek's HOA. IRS got wind of some suspicious financials. Apparently, someone's been funneling dues into personal accounts labeled as community events that never happened." I whistled through my teeth. "Let me guess, Brenda's name showed up multiple times, and it gets worse. 2 board members already turned over bank records under subpoena. One of them claims Brenda used HOA funds to pay off that zoning officer who tweaked your parcel lines. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Ellie knew what I was thinking. You gave them the match," she said. "Someone else lit the fire." It started unraveling fast after that. The local paper ran a weekend spread titled, "Queen of the Creek: How One HOA President Turned a Neighborhood into Her Kingdom." It had photos of the mansion half finished, the koi pond now filled with algae, and a side-by-side of Brenda's Lexus parked next to a city inspector's truck on 3 separate dates. Residents began organizing without her. A few of them held a town hall in a borrowed church basement. They invited me to speak. I didn't plan to go, but Ellie called again the night before. "Porter, you've already won the lawsuit, but this is about more than your land now," so I showed up. The room was packed. Folding chairs lined every wall. A whiteboard at the front had the words, "Where did our money go?" scrawled in red marker. A middle-aged man in a faded flannel stood up first. "My wife and I paid for a new sidewalk along our block last year. HOA said it was our contribution to safety improvements, but the city says they never approved construction." A younger woman followed. "I asked for a copy of the bylaws. Brenda told me they were under revision. That was 15 months ago. I waited until they'd all spoken. Then I stepped forward and told them what I'd seen, what I'd documented, and what the court had ruled. I kept it short, just the facts. When I finished, no one applauded. They didn't need to. The energy in that room had shifted. These weren't victims anymore. They were witnesses." 2 days later, a detective from the county's white-collar crimes unit showed up at my gate. "Name's Detective Marquez," he said, holding out his badge. "Mind if I ask you a few questions about your testimony and the documents you submitted during the civil trial?" "Not at all," I said. "You want coffee?" he nodded. "Black, if you've got it." We sat on the porch while he flipped through a binder I'd built over the past year. He paused on the drone photos showing the construction timeline. "You had this much documented before you even filed the complaint," started the day I saw survey flags. He chuckled once, low and short. "You ever work in law enforcement, fire department?" I said. "But I've seen enough people try to bend rules when they think no one's watching." He closed the binder and looked out across the property. "You know, if she'd tried this 10 years ago, might have gotten away with it." "Maybe," I said. "But now she's got neighbors with phones and filing cabinets." The next week, the police executed a search warrant on Brenda's house. Not the mansion, her original home on the east end of Willow Creek. 3 squad cars, 1 unmarked SUV. Residents stood on their lawns, silent. No one shouted. No one interfered. They carried out boxes, hard drives, laptops, even a desktop tower with a cracked side panel. Brenda wasn't home at the time. She'd gone quiet since the verdict. Her Lexus hadn't moved in days. A rumor floated around that she was staying at her sister's place upstate. But then something strange happened. 2 of the board members who'd publicly denounced her after the trial suddenly reversed course. They gave statements to the local paper claiming they'd never suspected any wrongdoing and that recent events had been blown out of proportion. It didn't sit right with me. So I did what I always did. I started digging. Turns out, Both had received substantial home improvements in the 3 years prior: new roofs, patio expansions, and one even had a pool resurfaced. All done by the same contractor Brenda had used for the mansion, and none of them could produce receipts. Ellie took that information straight to the DA's office. At that point, it wasn't just a fraud case, it had become racketeering. The DA convened a grand jury. Subpoenas went out like fireworks: contractors, real estate agents, a former HOA treasurer who'd moved to Arizona, even a landscaper who'd been paid nearly $30,000 for beautification projects that no one could locate. Meanwhile, I finally got the mansion appraised. The structure itself was solid but unfinished, wiring incomplete, plumbing mismatched. The koi pond had cracked at the base from poor installation. It would have taken more to finish it than it was worth, so I made a decision. I contacted a local trade school and offered it as a hands-on training site. They accepted. Within a month, students in hard hats were learning electrical work, masonry, and carpentry using the mansion as their classroom. Local media picked up the story again. This time the headline read, "From Fraud to Future: How One Man Turned a Symbol of Greed into a Place of Learning." I didn't do interviews. I didn't need to. The building spoke for itself. One afternoon, while checking the site, I saw a teenager holding a level against a new door frame. He looked up and said, "You the owner?" "Sort of," I said. "Depends on the day." He smiled and went back to work. I stayed there a long time, watching them move with focus and purpose the opposite of how that place had been built. Then the phone rang. Detective Marquez again. "Brenda's lawyer just filed a plea deal. She's admitting to conspiracy, falsifying public records, and misuse of funds. The DA's dropping 2 charges in exchange for full cooperation." I didn't ask what she was giving up. I didn't care. Not long after, I walked to the edge of the property, where the old HOA boundary line used to run. It was just dirt now, no more flags, no imaginary power line dividing people into haves and rule followers. A small group of neighbors had gathered there, planting saplings donated by a local nursery. One of them, the woman with the sunflower garden, waved me over. "We're calling this the clean break line," she said, patting the soil. "Everything past here starts fresh." I nodded. Sounds about right. No more fines, no more secret meetings, no more empires built on bluff and bluster. Just soil, sun, and a few people finally figuring out what community really means. 3 weeks after Brenda's plea deal was accepted, a quiet tension settled over Willow Creek. The kind that lingers after a storm levels everything to silence before people decide whether to rebuild or move on. The grand jury had completed its work, and the county prosecutor announced charges against 6 additional individuals tied to the HOA's inner circle. Each one was accused of participating in financial misappropriation, falsification of permits, and in 2 cases, wire fraud for using HOA funds to launder personal debts through fake vendor contracts. The courtroom schedule filled up fast. One by one, those who used to hand out citations for mailbox colors now appeared in front of a judge, dressed in suits instead of smug expressions. Brenda, once the iron-fisted figure of the neighborhood, had become a footnote in the prosecutor's press conference. The bigger story was how deep the rot had gone and how many people had been complicit when they thought no one would notice. I stayed out of all that. Instead, I focused on the trade school students. They'd made real progress. The mansion now had functioning electrical systems, fully piped bathrooms, and a working kitchen. The decorative columns had been stabilized, and the cracked koi pond had been removed entirely. In its place, the students had built a small amphitheater for outdoor classes and community events. I funded the materials through a grant Ellie helped me secure. The rest came from small donations, $50 here, $100 there, from people who just wanted to see something good come out of the mess. One morning, while reviewing blueprints for finishing the upper floor, I got a call from Marquez. "You got a minute?" he asked. "There's something you need to see." I met him at the county evidence facility. He handed me a stack of printed emails that had just been unsealed. They were recovered from Brenda's personal account, he said. We weren't going to show them to you, but you're named in more than one. I read them word for word. In one thread, Brenda was coordinating with a private security firm to monitor my property. Not officially, there were no contracts, but she'd paid them through a shell landscaping company. She'd instructed them to track activity and document any violations of regional code, even if informal. Another email mentioned a plan to have my water access cut off by reporting a fabricated leak to the county utilities board. She never filed these requests officially, Marquez said. But she was laying groundwork if you hadn't gone to court when you did. She would have forced me out, I finished. He nodded once. It's not just land theft anymore. We're charging her with attempted unlawful eviction through abusive process. How long is that going to add? Could be another 2 years. Depends on how the judge reads it. I handed the stack back and walked out without saying much. I didn't need justice to come with fireworks. Quiet accountability worked just fine. By the time autumn rolled in, the neighborhood had shifted its energy. A new HOA board had been elected, not that they held much sway anymore. The bylaws were rewritten from scratch, this time under public scrutiny. Every meeting was open, recorded, and posted online. The enforcement mechanisms were scaled back to basics: trash collection, sidewalk maintenance, and seasonal landscaping. No more fines for wind chimes or flower beds. The couple with the garden had turned their yard into a community exchange. A little free library on one side, a produce bin on the other where people left extra tomatoes or squash from their plots. Kids painted signs by hand. Someone added a bench with a plaque that read, "Less control, more community." One afternoon, I was walking back from the amphitheater when I saw a familiar car parked near my fence. Not the Lexus she'd sold that to pay part of the restitution. This was a dull gray sedan with government plates. A woman in a tailored blazer stepped out, early 40s, clipboard in hand. "Mr. O'Connell?" she asked. "Depends who's asking." Christina Alvarez. Federal Housing Oversight. We're conducting a review of HOA governance practices in the region. Yours drew our attention. Because of what happened with Brenda. Because of how you responded to it. She asked if I'd be willing to speak at her regional conference scheduled for the following spring. Not as a whistleblower, but as someone who'd navigated the system, stood his ground, and helped rebuild a fractured community. "I'm not much for podiums," I said. "You don't have to be, just show up and tell the truth. That's more than most do." I told her I'd think about it. Later that week, Ellie dropped by. She hadn't come around much lately, too busy with depositions and prepping a civil suit against the former board members for damages incurred by residents. But that day, she had a different reason. "Thought you should know," she said, setting a folder on my kitchen table. "Brenda's agreed to permanent disbarment from any leadership role in neighborhood associations, anywhere in the state. That a condition of the plea, no, she volunteered it. Said she was done with community service." I raised an eyebrow. "She's also forfeiting the remaining assets she funneled through the fake vendors. That includes a condo in Florida, half ownership in a lakeside cabin, and a vintage car she bought using funds labeled infrastructure reserve. Who gets it? The court will liquidate the assets and use the proceeds to reimburse residents for wrongful fines and unapproved assessments. You'll get a check too, for the land, the disruption, and the legal costs. I don't want it. It's not optional." I accepted the envelope, but I never cashed the check. Instead, I endorsed it over to the trade school, along with a note asking them to use it for scholarships. They sent back a framed certificate naming one of their new buildings after me. I didn't hang it. Over the next few months, things settled into a rhythm. The students finished the last major construction on the mansion, now renamed Willow Hall. It opened its doors to the public in late November with a small ceremony. No press, no politicians, just the builders, their families, and a few neighbors who'd watched it all unfold. A kid who'd installed the HVAC system gave a short speech. Said he used to walk past the place and think it was cursed like it didn't belong. Now, he said, it felt like part of something real. After the ribbon was cut, I wandered to the back of the building where the amphitheater overlooked the woods. The leaves were turning amber and rust, and the air held that brief stillness just before winter settles in. A woman from the neighborhood approached, someone I hadn't met before. "You're Porter, right?" she asked. "That's me. I just wanted to say thanks. My parents live 2 streets over." They were planning to move after all that nonsense, said it didn't feel like home anymore, but they changed their minds. Glad to hear it. She looked out over the trees. It's strange how one person can mess up so much. It's not just one person, I said. It's everyone who lets them. She nodded, then left me standing there with nothing but the wind and the sound of distant laughter from the kids who'd helped rebuild everything. I never heard from Brenda again. Last I checked, she'd relocated to a town 3 counties over. No HOA, no clipboard, no koi pond. Her mansion was gone. In its place stood something earned. Not through control or intimidation, but through patience, evidence, and a community finally waking up to its own power. That was enough for me.